Bogatov, all of the learning this morning at the special OU Purim program or pre-Purim program, sponsored by Batsheva Cantor in memory of Dr. Reuven Cantor ben Beryl Leib Halevi, who was nifter, passed away on February 5th, Chav Zayin Shvat of last year. Man of a pure heart and Torah scholar. He's missed very much by all the family. Also, today's learning is sponsored by Michael and Sharon Cronenberg. יהי רצון שהקדוש ברוך הוא יברך את עמו ישראל בשלום, ישלח ישועות ורפואות נחמות לכל הנתונים בצרה ושביה לחיילים ותושבי ארצנו הקדושה. That was the dedication from the Cronenberg family. And our share is, our weekly share is for the entire year, is dedicated by the Fist family, in memory of Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman, Aleh Shalom. For those who are just joining us today, the shirim this year, we normally at 9:15, deals with Piyutei Kodesh, which is religious or Jewish poetry. That sounds very, very foreign when we say that, but it's piyutim that we say either during davening or during Zmirot, and somehow we sing some of these songs with great gusto, and we don't have a clue what we're doing or what we're saying, and we're trying to give some understanding, background to these songs. For Purim, so I've selected Shoshanat Yaakov. I did already. I did. I announced all the sponsorships. What was that? This was new. This was not on the page. Okay. Share is also sponsored by Hanan and Sarah Lehman in memory of a beloved son-in-law and his third yahrzeit, the 6th of Adar, Yigal Noach ben Naveh, Yigal Naveh ben Rivka and Nehemiah Chesitruman. I actually knew the fellow. I know the family Citroen very well, matter of fact. Third yahrzeit. Okay. Yeah. So what could be better than to do a song like Shoshanat Yaakov? And what's interesting is the song doesn't begin Shoshanat Yaakov. That's how the melodies begin. Whether it's Shoshanat Yaakov, or any of the other 150,000 melodies that were attached to Shoshanat Yaakov, Tzalav V'Samecha. So what we printed on the page on top is Shoshanat Yaakov, Tzalav V'Samecha, Berotam Yachad Chelet Mordechai, Teshuatam, Ayid Al Netzach, Tikvatam, B'chol Davador. And this is what you have in the Sidurim, Lodia, Shekol Kovecha, Lo Yevoshu, and so on, Aru Haman, Aru Zeresh, Gam Chavona, Yischulatov. We'll see what this is all about. But if you just take a look at the bottom of the page, you have a long poem that begins with Asher Heini Atzat Goyim, Vayafer Machshavot Arumim. This poem is most probably foreign to many people, except for those who pay careful attention to the instructions in a siddur. So after we read the Megillah on the night of Purim, we have the final bracha that the Baal Koreh makes, Ha'aravet Rivenu Vadanet Inenu, and it ends with Hakel HaMoshiach. The halacha is that if a person is reading the Megillah privately, you make the first bracha, no doubt, because that's a birkat mitzvah. And that's a bracha that we say, Asher Kechanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu mikra Megillah. But the final bracha is only said in a quorum of 10. So I didn't use the word minyan for a specific reason. A quorum of 10. And the reason I said this is because there are two different reasons why we might insist on a quorum of 10. One is a davar shebikdusha. Those aspects of halacha that require a minyan, and those are 10 men over the age of bar mitzvah. So they include tefillah b'tzibur, kaddish, baruch hu, kedusha, kriyat Torah, birkat kohanim. There's a whole Mishnah in Masechet Megillah that delineates those areas of halacha that are defined as a davar shebikdusha. However, there are other things that we do that also require 10, but not as a davar shebikdusha, but rather because of berov am hadrat melech. When you do it in greater company, it glorifies the praising of God. just to say it to yourself or another one or two people around you, that's small. It's very miniature. But if it's done in a quorum of 10, so it sounds much more amplified. Berov am hadrat melech. And there, the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles says, with regard to the 10, the number 10, required to say the final bracha after the Megillah reading, he thinks maybe it could include women. He doesn't say it absolutely. He thinks it could include women because it's not the halacha of a minyan. And our Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik was much more definite about this, and he said absolutely. If it's 10 women, or 5 and 5, or 6 and 4, it makes no difference. The idea of Berov Am Hadrat Melech is not a requirement of Davasha V'Kedusha, and has nothing to do with a minyan in the sense of Kaddish and Kedusha and so on. So that's why if you're reading the Megillah for women, or if a woman's reading the Megillah for a quorum of 10 women, so we do make that final bracha. Even though the Ramah had it as a little bit of a question mark, but according to our great Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav, it was not a question mark at all. So that's that final bracha. And then in the Siddur will tell us that at night we read this whole poem, Asher Heini, and then in bold letters, what's printed is Shoshanat Yaakov Tzalav V'Samecha. And then the instructions in most Siddurim say, and in the morning, we don't say Asher Heini, this long poem, we just delete it, and we start with Shoshanat Yaakov Tzalav V'Samecha. Now, when you take something and you lift it out of context, sometimes it takes on a different meaning. So just without getting broiled into this, just as an illustration, so everybody here for sure remembers Chasal Seder Pesach Kilchato. It's Nirtza at the end of the Seder. That's when you're already sighing with relief, when you look at the clock. And you know that Chad Gadya is around the corner. Okay? So Chasal Seder Pesach is interpreted, we finished the Seder, we did what we could, and we hope that next year we'll do it better. We'll have the Beit HaMikdash, the Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, we'll have the Korban Pesach, and so on. This was a cut and paste job out of a very long-winded poem that was written by Rabbi Yosef Tov Elem, 12th century Ashkenaz, that is said in some shuls in Chutz La'aretz on Shabbat HaGadol as part of the Yotzrot. It begins with Elokei Aruchot L'chol Basar, and it's a poetic rendition of the laws of Pesach from A to Z, literally from A to Z, from B'dikat Chametz until everything it includes. And it ends with Chasal Sidur Pesach Kilchato. We just completed the Seder, because it's in the Siddur, the order. Kasher Zachinu Lisader Oto, as we had the Zchut today on Shabbat HaGadol, to say it in the Siddur, Kein Niskeh, we should have a Zchut to sit down at the Seder and perform it. So that's the original understanding of Chasal Seder Pesach. But then it was cut and lifted out of context, grafted into the Haggadah, and it had a different twist to it. So too with Shoshanas Yaakov. Let's look at the bottom poem, Asher Heini. Just take a look at the scheme of Aleph Bet. Asher, Bikum, Ga, Dima, Haman. Right? You get the point? It's the Aleph Bet. Keep going down, keep scrolling down, and it keeps going according to the Aleph Bet, and it gets to Kuf and Reish and Shin. What's the Shin? Shoshanat Yaakov Tzalav V'Samecha. Right? And the Taf is Chuatam Hayita Lenetzach V'Tikvatam B'Chol Davadar. The next line, Lahodia Shebchol Kovecha Lo Yevoshu, is not part of the poem. It's not part of the poem. Nor is Arur Haman Asher Bikesh Ladi Baruch Mordechai Yehudi. It's something else that was thrown in here, and we'll see in a moment why. But the poem ends with the letter, the Shin of Shoshanat Yaakov and the Taf of Shuatam. That's the end of the poem. Yet the custom was that in the morning we don't say the poem Asher Heini, but we say the poem Shoshanat Yaakov. There is no poem Shoshanat Yaakov. It's the last two lines of a long poem. So somehow or another, it was cut off. And the question is, why was it cut off? And why is this interesting minhag of only saying the Shoshanat Yaakov until the end in the morning, but instructing us to say the whole poem at nighttime? Now, just to be fair, there are variant minhagim on this. There are those who said Shoshanat Yaakov only at night and in the morning. Those are the ones who have no patience and are just thrilled that the Megillah was over and they just want to leave shul, so they don't have time for a long poem that they don't understand it anyway. Yeah, what? They have to go home and eat, right? It's time to stare for most, except for us Yerushalayim, except this year we do have it. Right, this year we do have it. Right, so they're not interested. Some poems, some customs were to say the whole Ashaheni at nighttime and in the morning. But we see here that there are varied minhagim, and the minhag that ultimately, made it, if you may, was the minhag to say Ashaheni, the whole long-winded poem at night, and to abbreviate it in the morning by just saying Shoshanat Yaakov. And I'll explain to you what this is all about. How many times on Purim are we to read the Megillah? Twice, right? At night and in the morning. If you open up the Mishnah in Masechet Megillah, you will never see anything about reading the Megillah at night. It doesn't exist. The original institution of reading the Megillah was a daytime mitzvah. It's the flip side of Hanukkah. We don't light the nerot in the daytime. We only light it at nighttime. There's a difference between performing mitzvot at night and performing mitzvot in the daytime. Lahagid baboker chazdecha ve'emunatcha baleilot. Our Rebbe the Rav was of the opinion, it may sound a little bit radical, and it's a shir in itself, which we're not going to do now, that the mitzvah of Hanukkah as a Yom Tov was instituted immediately after the events of Hanukkah, which is roughly 250 years before the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. But the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles as a formal rabbinic mitzvah began right after the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Which means we didn't light Hanukkah candles, according to the Rav, during Bayit Sheni. We had it as a Yom Tov that we said Hallel, that it was forbidden to fast, it was forbidden to say eulogies, but it didn't have this add-on mitzvah. But the mitzvah of Adlakat Nerot began after the Churban. And after the Churban means that OUisrael is moving into a long period of nighttime. And there it says, Ve'emunatcha baleilot. Nerot symbolize Jewish faith. And Jewish faith that we're going to get out of this. And we're going to grow in our faith in spite of the tragedies. We have some concrete examples of some young women and men who were freed from captivity recently to demonstrate how sometimes the horrific moments can actually bring out the best of emunah, of faith, even if somebody beforehand didn't have it. So that's why Hanukkah is a nighttime mitzvah. But it says, Lahagid baboker chazdecha. Hallel is a mitzvah of daytime. Hallel is a mitzvah of daytime. Kol hayom kasher lekriyat Hallel, says the Mishnah. The only exception of Hallel at nighttime is the Leila Seder, and the night of the Seder, where we say Hallel. And the Rav suggested that even that is not an exception. What do you mean it's not an exception? It's the only time we say Hallel at night, with a bracha even. And here in Eretz Yisrael we have the minhag even by Ma'ariv. We say Hallel in Shul, not only at the Seder. So we have Hallel at night. The Rav believed that Leila Seder, even though astronomically it's nighttime, but conceptually it's daytime. Vahi bachatzi halayla means it became daytime. And the reason that we're saying Hallel on the night of the Seder is the same reason we say Hallel on all other Chagim, because it's a moment of lahagid baboker chazdecha. And the paitanim of Vahi bachatzi halayla, unless we're going to do this as we get close to Pesach, show how we treat the night of the Seder as a daytime experience. So that's why we say Hallel. Purim. There are a variety of reasons why we don't have Hallel. One of the reasons is, the one that I grew up was, that it was a miracle of Chutz La'aretz. And only a nes of Eretz Yisrael would we say Hallel. There's a second reason in the Gemara, that actually there is an obligation of Hallel on Purim, except the Megillah reading is the Hallel. We just have an alternative text, but it's Hallel. We say, Shasani sim lavoteinu bayamim bahem b'zman hazeh. And that's the view that the Rambam brings lahalacha. That's the reason why we don't say Hallel, because we have the Megillah anyway. which led many of the late poskim to suggest if you're stuck somewhere on Purim without a Megillah, should you read Hallel? And many say, you know what? You should read Hallel, don't make the bracha, because we're not sure. But you should read Hallel anyway, because Purim deserves Hallel, except that we don't do it because we have the Megillah. It's a daytime experience. And the Mishnah in Masechet Megillah teaches us that Megillah reading is in the daytime. Period. Daytime. Because it's like Hallel. The Gemara, not the Mishnah, the Gemara comes along and says that just as there's an obligation to read the Megillah in the daytime, we should read it at nighttime as well. We should read it at nighttime as well. And I'm just going to read the pasuk that Chazal brought to support this. It comes from Tilim Perek Kavbet. Does that mean anything? Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. Exactly what the Chazal say, Esther says, the Mizmor ala Yelet HaShachar. And in this particular poem, that reads, Lamatzeach ala Yelet HaShachar, Mizmor LeDavid, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. Chazal say this is what Esther Hamalka said as she was walking into the chambers of Achashverosh, knowing this was do or die. Because if Achashverosh wouldn't receive her, she would be executed. So she's panicking to a certain degree, but going in with her Kadosh Baruch Hu, Gam ki yelech begeitz al mavet. She's facing the shadow of death right there. Lo ira ra ki ata imadi. God is with her. So maybe she wasn't panicking. But she was going with Eli, Eli. And what's the very next pasuk? Elohai ekra yomam velo ta'aneh velayla velo dumaya li. Something about a Kadosh Baruch Hu treating me in the daytime and treating me at nighttime. Kadosh Baruch Hu can't leave me alone, both in the night and in the daytime. This is something where you can see what we call tachnunim. She's petitioning a Kadosh Baruch Hu out of desperation. This is something of a nighttime endeavor. And the pasuk says something about Laila, it says something about Yom. So one of the opinions in the Gemara says, this is the source why our Chachamim in the days of the Gemara added a part of the mitzvah of reading the Megillah to the nighttime. So it's funny is, we have the addition before we have the real. The real mitzvah is the daytime. The addition is the nighttime. Yeah.
Where's the saying about Nisim at night and during the day?
Al-Nisim is something else. Al-Nisim is a different add-on. It's not part of this mitzvah of Kriyat Megillah. Okay? Let's hold off with Al-Nisim. I'll just say simply that the calendar date is the appropriate date for Purim, and Chazal said that we should make mention in Moedim and in Birkat Hamazon, in Notelecha, Chanukah and Purim. So that's why it's because it's already Purim. You can't deny that the night is Purim. So the night, whether you read the Megillah at night or not, is doesn't have any bearing on whether you're allowed to say a eulogy at night. You're not allowed to say a eulogy on the night of Purim or on the night of Chanukah. Because it's Purim, or it's Chanukah, whatever. Those are the Yomim Tovim are there. The question is the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. Where does that kick in? So here Chazal say that there was an add-on. So normally you have the real thing, and an add-on comes afterwards. On Purim, v'na'afochu, we do everything upside down. We have the add-on first, and then comes the real Makori, the real mitzvah. So much so, this led to a machloket, a dispute, between Rambam, representing Sephardi tradition, and the Tosfot, representing Ashkenazi tradition, whether you have to repeat the Shechayanu in the morning when you read the Megillah. Because the Rambam says, why should I repeat the Shechayanu in the morning? I said it last night. So you don't make a Shechayanu the second night of Hanukkah, the third night of Hanukkah. Shechayanu is the first time that you have something in the season. So the first time in the season that we have Megillah reading is the night of Purim. We said Shechayanu. The morning, it's the second time. So the Rambam says there's no Shechayanu. But Maram Rutenberg says, excuse me, the real mitzvah is the morning mitzvah. So that's why we repeat, Ashkenazim repeat Shechayanu. So you have some poskim who are nervous that the Rambam said no Shechayanu in the morning, right? Even the Rambam was a Sephardi, but the Rambam's impact on the poskim was so larger than man So what they suggested was when you say the Shechayanu in the morning, according to Ashkenazi tradition, have in mind the other mitzvahs of the day, the Sudat Purim, Mishloch Manot, Matanot Avyonim, which, by the way, Chazal never made a Shechayanu for those mitzvahs. They never made it. But this is a way of, have it in mind. So just in case the Rambam's right, and there shouldn't be Shechayanu, there shouldn't be a Bracha Levatala. So we have in mind. I mean, so much so, somebody asked me a question just this week, whether in Yerushalayim you should be making a Shechayanu on Sunday of the Sudat Purim and the Mishloch Manot, which is Purim Mishulash, the triangular Purim, because we have the Megillah on Friday and the Al Anisam on Shabbos, and the Sudat Purim and the Mishloch Manot on Sunday. So maybe we should make a Shechayanu because Ashkenazim, no. There was never a mitzvah to say, never a halachic requirement to say Shechayanu for the mitzvah of for Sudat Purim and Mishloch Manot. What? There's no bracha anyway. There's no bracha mitzvah. It was just thrown in to somehow pacify Ashkenazi ulcers who think that maybe the Rambam is right and we shouldn't be making a Shechayanu in the reading of the Megillah in the morning. So have in mind the other mitzvahs. Okay, so it was a pill that we take. That's all, but nothing more than that. The machloket was now the Rambam agrees that the real Megillah reading is the morning. There's no machloket, no dispute about that. The Rambam simply believed if I said Shechayanu last night, I don't have to repeat it in the morning. But the Ashkenazim felt no, we have to put our hands down that indeed the real reading of the Megillah is the morning, and the morning Megillah is Hallel. So what is the night Megillah all about? If it's not Hallel, it's Tachnunin. What's Tachnunin? Petition. It's from Keli Lama Azaftani, because Purim suffers from halachic schizophrenia. Purim it's a great day of Yom Mishteh V'Simcha. It's a great day of celebration, no doubt. But it was a near miss. It was almost, I know people don't like to use the word Holocaust out of the context of the 20th century Holocaust. But there's no other way to describe Lashmid, Laharog, Ula'abed, et kol hayudim, mina'ar v'ad zaken, taf v'nashim, b'yom echad. It was a near miss. It was a near Holocaust. And thank God we survived it. It didn't happen. How many Jews were hurt and maimed or killed in the skirmishes with the Haman forces? We don't have a clue. What does the Megillah tell us? How many Haman people were killed? That's what we're told. 5,000 here, right? 75,000 there. I mean, it's like a basketball game, right? It was 120-0. It was a shutout. You think it was a shutout? Nobody was hurt? Why doesn't the Megillah tell us that information? In Yiddish, there's a phrase called Nicht zerstören der Simcha. This is the problem of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut back to back. It's hard. But there were those who died too. But they decided to censor it, not to write about it. It would be too painful for us. But thank God it wasn't a Shoah. We survive, no doubt. And that part of Tzara v'Yagon had to be remembered. And therefore Chachamim said, you know what? Let's read the same text and focus on the tzara, on the trouble, on the difficulty, what we almost had. That's the nighttime reading. And therefore all the gaiety in shuls at the nighttime reading of Megillah is totally out of place. Totally out of place. Totally. I'm sorry if I'm a spoiler, but it's totally out of place. It's almost like saying Tachnan in the morning, Hashem the Begadim, make groggers and everything. It's wrong. You should be crying. So much so that in the early Middle Ages, probably in the days of the Geonim, 8th century, 9th century, they instituted a fast called Tanit Esther. Why? Because Tanit Esther should have been on Purim. But you can't have a fast on the same day that you have Mishteh Simcha. So they split it. And they said, fine, Purim will be Yom Mishteh Simcha, and the fasting part will be the day before. Where did they get that brilliant idea from? The Kabbalists use the phrase in the Chumash. In the Torah, it never says Yom Kippur, as we call it, Yom Kippur. It's always in plural. Yom Kippurim. And they read Yom Kippurim. The day like Purim. The last day in the calendar that I would associate with Yom Kippur is Purim. It's so anti-Yom Kippur. Yet, there's something about Yom Kippur. There's something about Purim and Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur and Purim. And the Rav said that Yom Kippur also has this halachic schizophrenia, dual personality. On the one hand, it's defined as Be'initem et nafshotechem, it's a day of fasting, a day of tshuva, a day of solemn tefillah. On the other hand, it's a Yom Tov. It's part of Moedei Yisrael. Although there's a machloket, what happens if a person is in Avelut, a sitting Shiva before Yom Kippur? Is Yom Kippur treated like Shabbat? You don't sit Shiva, but it continues after Yom Kippur? Or is it like Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, that it negates the Shiva? What's the halacha? It negates the Shiva. Totally negates the Shiva. Why? Because Yom Kippur has Simchat Yom Tov. So if it has Simchat Yom Tov, what do we do on Simchat Yom Tov? You eat. V'samachta b'chagecha. How can you eat? How can you have Simchat Yom Tov and Yom Kippur? So the Gemara says, Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh b'tshi'i, whoever eats and drinks on Erev Yom Kippur, ma'aleh alav ha'katuv ki'ilu hit'aneh b'tshi'i v'asiri. It's equivalent to have fasted the 9th and the 10th. Whoever asked you to fast on the 9th? Doesn't say anyway you have to fast on the 9th. What it means is that what we're doing on the 9th of Tishrei by eating, we're fulfilling the Simchat Yom Tov of the 10th of Tishrei, which is a fast day. So just like Yom Kippur has this duality, except that the day is defined as fasting, but the Simcha is performed and accomplished the day before. On Purim, it's v'nahafachu, it's afuch, it's the opposite. The day is Yom Mishneh v'Simcha. The fasting and the Yom Tzara v'Yagon is accomplished day before. And I can prove this. The Rav actually said this, not my own. The Rav said, fasting Tanit Esther is the most lenient of all the fast days in our calendar. Right? Yom Kippur is the most serious, Tisha B'Av next in line, and then comes Shavuos B'Tammuz, Har B'Teves, and some Gedalia. And then there's Tanit Esther. Everybody learned Kitzur Shulchan Aruch knows if you have a headache, you can eat on Tanit Esther. The poskim are very lax when it comes to Tanit Esther. Fine, okay, I understand it. It's relatively new. It wasn't from the days of Chazal. It entered into the 8th, 9th, 10th century, in the early Middle Ages. Okay, Beseda. So how come every shul, when they have Tanit Esther and people are hungry, they don't have a break after Myra for people to nibble for 10, 15 minutes on a cup of coffee and a Danish before reading the Megillah? I mean, Megillah can wait. But no, what is done in most shuls? They read the Megillah. So which extends the fast by an hour, depending on how fast the Baal Korah reads, until you get home. For sure, it extends the fast by an hour. And this is the most lean of fast days. Why torture Am Yisrael by another hour? Why do we do it? So most people say, because ein mavirin ala mitzvot. If you have a mitzvah, right in front of you, mitzvah haba liyadcha al tachamitzena. Don't make the mitzvah sour. Do it. You have the mitzvah now of Megillah, read it. Okay. Because of that, you let people fast an extra hour? Rav said that's not what it is. He says, so we can go into the nighttime reading the Megillah, fasting. With the feeling that this is the Tzara v'Yagon reading of the Megillah, as opposed to the morning. When one understands this, one understands the minhag of Ashaheni being read at night, which reviews the tzoros. It reviews the near miss, what Haman planned to do. Just reading about what Haman planned to do is shocking, is very shocking. That's what we read at night. But in the morning, the whole concept of the Megillah is Hallel. So we don't want to talk about that, but we still talk about it at nighttime. We'll start with Shoshanat Yaakov, Tzahala v'samecha, Birotam Yachad, Tchelet Mordechai, Chuatam. So that's why it's abbreviated. So we can focus on the Hallel part of this poem, which is exclusively Hallel. So I mentioned this Ashaheni follows the Aleph Bet until Chuatam Hayita Lanetzach was the letter Taf. Who wrote this poem? So on top I wrote on the source page Mechaber Lo Yadua. That has happened in our shiurim already. But let's look at source number 1 after the poem of Shoshanat Yaakov. Source number 1 doesn't come from the Rishonim or the Achronim. It comes from a manuscript. I'm putting on my academic hat now. Ktav Yad, Oxford, 1102. Okay, you want to see it? We're going to have to make reservations for the El Al flight to London and make an appointment at the Body and Library, and we'll go to Oxford and we'll check this one out. Chaval to go to Chutz La'aretz. All you got to do is go online, and you have to know which button to push, and you'll get this. But this is brought down, Muva Etzel Grossman. I'm talking about a very special person who I had a zchut of knowing, Professor Avram Grossman, Zichrona Levracha. Many of us know his son, who's a professor of Tanakh. He teaches the Herzog, Professor Yoni Grossman, Yonatan Yoni Grossman. His father was affiliated with our shul on Nechama. Chachmei Ashkenaz v'Harishonim. And he writes the following. Rabbi Asher. Who is this Rabbi Asher? Savo, not the Rosh. Savo shel Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi. Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi is a teacher of Rashi. Rashi had 3 principal teachers in the city of Worms. Rashi came from a town in northern France called Troyes, which is written Troyes. Troys, pronounced Troyes. I think I got it right. My fellow Frenchies in Ol Nechama, they would correct me right away. Troyes. That's where Rabbeinu Tam was. That's where his yeshiva was. Rashi was born in Troyes, but went to Vermisia, Worms, to learn. So if you take a trip today to Worms, they're going to take you to the shul of Rashi. Another spoiler. It's the same location, but a completely different building. The building was destroyed, but they built the shul on the ashes of Rashi. So they call it Rashi's Beis Medrash. Good enough for me. Rashi had a teacher, Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi, whose grandfather was Rabbi Asher. That takes us down to the late 10th century. And he established, according to this manuscript, Asher Haini, the Piyut Asher Haini, and a few other Piyutim, and he gives the names of them. V'haya Yehudi Harishon Asher ba lagur beVarmaisia. He's the first Jew of Worms. Uba l'sham me'ir Vitry. Vitry is in France. Students of Rashi were in Vitry. There's a siddur that's called Machzor Vitry, but it's actually a siddur, right? And there it says the Yuchsin of the Mishpacha, and he was a Levi. Okay, so we know this Rabbi Asher was a Levi. His grandfather was a Levi. Fine. So we have some indication. There are some scholars who challenge Professor Grossman on this. I just have too much respect for Professor Avram Grossman. I wasn't going to leave this one out. So I wrote on top, Mechaber Lo Yadua, because officially that's the word. We don't know who wrote it. The only thing is, there's a hint that Professor Grossman was right. Many of our poems, there's some hidden signature of the poet, usually acrostic. We did this with L'Chadodi, Shlomo Levi, Alkabatz of Shlomo Levi, Shama V'Zachor, Likrat Shabbat, and so on. We saw it in many of the Zmirot, whether it was Yisrael Najara, whether it was Avraham ibn Ezra, Yudah Levi. I mean, they write their initials, the first stanzas or the last stanzas of the poem. So they sign off in this very poetic way. The opening line of this poem is very strange. Asheheni atzat goyim. That's how you start a poem. Who, in English, we would say, who did this, without writing who we're talking about. There should be a pasuk about a Kadosh Baruch Hu, somehow. Bring a pasuk somewhere about a Kadosh Baruch who did the following. What did he do? Asher heini atzat goyim vayafer machshavot arumim. He was able to thwart off the plan of the Gentiles, and he was able to change hafaras to turn upside down the plans of the naked ones. So where does this come from? Look at source number 2, and I'm sorry. So do I have it here? On the next side. On the next side, it will be source number 8 and source number 9. We say source number 8 every morning in Yehi Chavot. Hashem hefir atzad goyim, heini machshavot amim. So what is hefir atzad goyim? First of all, it begins with a Kadosh Baruch Hu. He's the subject of the pasuk. Kadosh Baruch Hu is mefir, turns it over, the plan of the goyim, and he thwarts the machshavot amim. Now, in this poem, he doesn't have Hashem's name. How does it begin? Asher heini atzat goyim, who changed. He takes the whole pasuk, but takes a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name out, and what does he put in? His name. His name was Asher. Isn't that cute? His name was Asher. Yeah.
It also makes sense that he wouldn't have Hashem's name in his feud about
Yafem Od. Yafem Od. The only Sefer in Tanakh where God's name is just not there, which led to a whole discussion. Is it part of Kitvei HaKodesh or not? There's a Mishnah in Masechet Yadayim. It's said that Taharot. Most people never get to it unless they do Mishnah Yomit. They get to it eventually. But the Mishnah talks about those Kitvei HaKodesh that if you touch it, you then have to wash your hands. It's a whole story that they used to hide Kitvei HaKodesh in the Aron Kodesh because it's a nice place. I'm sorry, they used to hide Truma in Truma fruits and vegetables in the Aron Kodesh, so lest no one who's not a Kohen touch it. Except the mice didn't know that, and then the mice came in and they would nibble not only on the food but also on the parchment, and it ruined Svarim. So they said they've made a gzera of Tumah that's emitted from Kitvei HaKodesh. The whole thing all sounds absurd, but the last place you would put the Truma is the Aron Kodesh now, because you don't want the Truma to become defiled. So it saved the parchments. So the litmus test, if something is part of Kitvei HaKodesh, part of the Canaan of 24 Svarim or not, is this halacha of Metamei Yadayim in vogue? And with 3 different Svarim, there's actually a big machloket, and one is Megillat Esther. But ultimately it makes it. It's part of Kitvei HaKodesh. And one of the reasons is God's name's not there. It's just not there. And the Gemara says, Megillah nikreit igeret v'nikreit sefer. It's a Masech Megillah Yutet. Megillah is called an igeret, it's a letter, and it's also called a sefer, it's a book. And I remember the Rav giving a whole drasha on this once, on the yard side of his mother on the 11th of Adar. He said that igeret is just not a letter, it's a newspaper. What do you do in a newspaper after you finish reading the newspaper? You either wash the windows or wrap fish or put it in the mixzur box, and that's it, right? It's just, okay, I told the story, yalla, get rid of it. What's a sefer? Sefer is part of Kitvei HaKodesh. It has eternal message. Eternal message. You can read Megillat Esther with bifocal glasses. You can see it as an igeret, and you can see it as a sefer. Take your pick. You can read the Megillah as if it was just another story, and it's a royal story, and at the end, the whole story it's a Sefer Divrei Hayamim L'Malchei Parasu Madai. It's in the history books. So Ibn Ezra says that's why they didn't write God's name, because it's going to go into the library, the Persian, not municipal, but monarch library, and there you have all the Avodah Zarah, all the Getchkes, and all the idolatry books and everything. B'Achil Hashem, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name is going to have to sit on the shelf. So they decided to keep. That's what Ben Ezra says. But others say, in the spirit of what the Chazal say, it's Gemara Chulin Kuf Lametet, Esther min haTorah minayin. How do you know the story of Esther? By allusion, of course, in the Chumash. It says in Parshat Vayelech ve'anochi haster astir panai. I will hide my face. And the word astir is Aleph Samach Taf Reish. Spells out the name Esther. And there Chazal say that this is a story where Kadosh Baruch Hu is in the background. He's not on front stage. And you see in the story itself that Mordechai is groping in the darkness. Umi yudea im la'ed kazot higat lamalchut. Did he know for sure? No. But if Esther did not take upon herself the mission, Revach v'atzala layudim mimakom acher. Okay, if it doesn't work with you, Kadosh Baruch Hu is going to find a plan, an alternative plan. And some say Makom is a nickname of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right? We say Makom Yanachim. Baruch Kvar Hashem Mimkomo. Revach v'atzala yamod layudim mimakom acher. V'atu veit avich tovedu. Umi yudea im la'ed kazot higat lamalchut. Who knows if this wasn't the reason why God chose you to be the queen? So stand up and do it. And he encourages Esther to stand up and do it. But he doesn't know for sure. And the Rav spoke about this on Kol Dodita Fake, Yom Ha'atzmaut, 1956 at YU. And 8 years after the state was established. That you didn't see a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the open. But how can you miss a Kadosh Baruch Hu? How can you miss it? And that was the story. And therefore, it's quite correct that Kadosh Baruch Hu's name's not here. But in its place, he has an allusion to his own name, Osher. Asher Heini Atzat Goyim. So in source number 8, Hashem Hefir Atzat Goyim. Heini, so you see he takes this pasuk, twists it around a little bit, Asher Heini Atzat Goyim. And then Heini Machshavot Amim, Heini Atzat Goyim, he takes the pasuk from number 9, Mefer Machshavot Arumim, in Eov. Kadosh Baruch Hu changes and flips the plans of the naked ones. And then in the poem itself, it just runs, we don't have a lot of time for this, but it runs with talking about Haman. Bekum Aleinu Adam Rasha. Right? Bekum Aleinu Adam. I have the sources on the page where it comes from the Netzar Zadon Mizera Amalek. This wicked person from the seed of Amalek. And that's brought about the fact that he's called Haman Agagi, from Agag. And that's the story in Sefer Shmuel of Shaul HaMelech, who does not fulfill the entire command to wipe out Amalek in its entirety. And Agag is spared. And he says, Ga'eb Oshro. Yeah, this Haman was very proud of his wealth, the Charalo Bor, and he dug his own ditch. I mean, it sounds so modern, this phrase. He dug his own ditch. He fell into his own pit because of his audacity. Ugdulato yakshanu lachad. And it was what he thought his greatness, it actually set up a trap for him. Dima benafsho lilkod v'nilkad. He wanted to trap, but he himself got trapped. It's what we call midah keneged midah, measure for a measure, but it's also the v'na'afochu. Everything flips. Bikesh lahashmid v'nishmad. He wanted to lashmid et Ayudim, but he got wiped out. V'nishmad mehera. Haman hodia evat avutav. Yeah, he opened up the can of worms of the hatred of Amalek. The orer sinat achim. The hatred of Yaakov and Esav. Remember, Amalek is an Enokel. He's a grandson of Esav. And he opens up the enmity of Esav towards Yaakov. To whom? Labanim, to the subsequent generations. V'lo zachar rachamei Shaul. And he doesn't remember that Shaul HaMelech spared his great-grandfather. This he forgot. Ki b'chemnoto al Agag nolad oyev. Because of Shaul's compassion, the enemy was born. Zamam rasha lachrit tzadik. He planned, this Rasha planned to destroy Mordechai, who was the tzaddik. V'nilkad tamei bidei tahor. This sounds almost like Alanisim, tamei and biat tahirim. That was done deliberately. Chesed gavar al shigegat av. Who's the chesed? Who's noseit chesed? Chen b'chesed be'inav. This is Esther. She is the one who had chen and chesed in the eyes of Achashverosh, and she is going to be to take over, to be victorious over the mistake of the parent. Chazal say that Esther was, we know from Shevet Binyamin, Mordechai was Shevet Binyamin, Esther, according to Chazal, was a niece, maybe a daughter, but a niece, the Beit Paro, the Bat Paro, and so on, she was from Shevet Binyamin, Ish Yemini, and she may have been a direct descendant from Shaul HaMelech, who was Shevet Binyamin. The Rasha Hosif Chet al Chata'av, and this Rasha just continued to overdo it. Taman b'libo machshavot arumav. He planned in his heart all kinds of things that he was going to do. V'yitmaker la'asot ra'ah, and he became like addicted, for the word hitmakru, to do. He became just obsessed with doing evil. Yado shalach b'kedoshe el. He struck at those who are kedoshe el, which is Am Yisrael. Kaspo natan lachrit zichram. He was willing to cough up a lot of money. Vaseret alafim kikar kesef eshkol ayedei oseh amlacha. He's willing to give Achashverosh huge amounts of cash for the right to destroy Mordechai and his nation, Am Mordechai. And Chazal say that the idea of eshkol ayedei oseh amlacha comes from the word shekel, that Haman wanted to pay money, shkalim, to get rid of Am Yisrael. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu beat him to the punch. Hikdim shkalim lishkalav. He had the remedy on the shelf before the Makkah. And that's why 2 weeks before Purim, be'echad be'adar mashmi'im ala shkolim. The idea of announcing the mitzvah shkolim is before Purim to beat the Haman at his game. And this is Eshkol Yedei Mlacha. And it says, Kirot Mordechai ki yatsa ketzev, and Mordechai saw that the Gzera came out, Datan Haman, V'datei Haman nitnu b'Shushan, and these enactments of Haman were spread throughout Shushan. Lavash sak, he wore a sack of mourning, V'kashar mispaid, V'gazar tzom, and made the fast days, V'yeshav ala efer, sak v'efer, sak the Rabim. All this is paraphrased in the Megillah. Mize ya'amod l'chaper shkaga, v'limchol chatot avon avotenu. Here's the reference to Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's almost a type of rhetorical comment. Who is going to the iniquities of Am Yisrael? That's a speech in itself. And I'll just say in one word, Mordechai figured out why Kadosh Baruch Hu had this gezerah, because there was the decree by Cyrus of Persia to go back to Eretz Yisrael with license of the Persian authority to have Eretz Yisrael, build the Beit HaMikdash, and there were no takers. You know what the last time there were no takers to enter Eretz Yisrael? It's called the Meraglim. There were no takers. And you know what the result was? Yitamu v'sham yamutu. They're going to perish. And Chazal say, B'olam hazeh u'me'olam haba. That generation that saw so much of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Kriyat Yam Suf, Matan Torah, it all went down the tubes. Yitamu v'sham yamutu. And Mordechai realized, Mordechai yada et kol asher nasa. It clicked. In Hebrew we say, asimon nafal, except our grandchildren don't have a clue what you're talking about. It's almost like saying, take the phone, lichayeg. Lichayeg, right. Right? He stays, you're right. This is a big issue. And he realizes that that was the chait, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ready to implement the same Yitamu v'Sham Yamutu on the whole generation. La'ashmid la'rogu la'beid, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to have to forgive us for this. And the poem goes on with the better side of the story of Esther and doing her thing, and Am Yisrael coming around, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without mentioning his name, acting on our favor. Where Reish it says, Ra'ita et tfilat Mordechai, fasting goes with tefillah hand in hand, and ultimately what ended up was Shoshanat Yaakov Tzahala v'Samecha Birotam Yachad. When they saw Mordechai bilavush sak, well, not bilavush sak, but bilavush tchelet, at the ninth parak of Megillat Esther, I think I had it mamash at the beginning. It's source number 2. Mordechai yatzal lefnei hamelech bilavush malchut tchelet v'chur ateret zahav gedolah. So then it says Vayir Shushan Tzahala v'Samecha, for sure Am Yisrael, Shoshanat Yaakov. That's a reference to Am Yisrael, as it says Kishoshana bein hachochim in Shir Hashirim. It's Am Yisrael, the Yudim, Tzahala v'Samecha, Tishuatam hayita lanetzach. This became something that we would live with permanently. B'tikvatam, b'chol dovador. We would continue for generations until this very day. It's not an accident that the Talmud Yerushalmi says, and the Rambam brings it la'alocha, kol asfarim, all the books of the Nevi'im, b'teilim liyamot HaMashiach, chutz mimigillat Esther, shene'emar, v'zichram lo yosuf mizaram. Okay.